Cassidy Miller had learned to survive by staying small. At the Gilded Lily, a luxury restaurant on Chicago's Gold Coast, being invisible was part of the uniform. On Tuesday nights, the city's old money crowd came in with quiet voices and sharp eyes, the kind of people who could ruin your week with a single complaint. Cassidy wiped a wine ring from a white tablecloth and ignored the way her manager, Henry, kept barking orders like she was a machine. "Table 4 wants another refill," he snapped. "And stop staring at Mr. Blackwood. You look terrified." Cassidy wasn't trying to stare, but it was hard not to notice the man sitting alone in the best alcove, framed by velvet curtains and city lights. Audrine Blackwood looked like a portrait that had stepped out of a museum, dark hair swept back, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Cassidy's yearly rent, and eyes that didn't seem to match the room. He hadn't eaten. His steak sat untouched, cooling like it never mattered. He wasn't drunk, loud, or rude. He was simply present, and that was worse. Because Cassidy felt the hum again, the strange pressure she'd carried since childhood, a low vibration in her skull that warned her when something was wrong. Around most people, it was a faint ache. Around Blackwood, it rose into a loud metallic buzz that tasted like pennies and smelled like the air before lightning dot when Blackwood asked for the check. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words traveled cleanly across the room, like the building itself listened to him. Cassidy carried the folder over with shaking fingers, keeping her eyes on the linen. He typed one last message on his tablet, then looked up and locked onto her gaze like he'd been expecting her. "Thank you, Cassidy," he said calmly. He didn't look at her name tag. He never did. He slid a black card into the folder without opening it. "Add 30% for yourself," he added, like generosity was a habit, not kindness. Cassidy managed a stiff nod and turned away, heart beating too fast, as if her body knew something her mind couldn't explain got outside. The rain fell in sheets, turning the street into a shining mirror. The valet, a kid named Toby, pulled up a sleek black sedan, armored, tinted, and silent in a way that made it feel less like a car and more like a moving vault. Blackwood stepped under the awning, buttoning his jacket as if the weather didn't exist. Cassidy followed without thinking, the hum climbing into a sharp, painful whine. Then it hit her, not a sound, but a smell chemical and wrong, cutting through rain, exhaust, and expensive cologne. Sulfur, sharp metal, and something sickly sweet that made her stomach turn. Blackwood's hand reached for the door handle. Cassidy's chest seized. She didn't decide to scream. The scream tore out of her like survival itself. "Don't get in the car," she shouted, sprinting onto the wet curb and grabbing his sleeve. For one stunned second, the world paused. Toby blinked in confusion. Henry's shocked gasp floated from the doorway. Blackwood turned slowly, irritation flickering across his perfect face, then changing into something colder and clearer. He inhaled once, like he finally noticed what she noticed. He didn't run. He moved. In a single blur, he pulled Cassidy close, turned his back to the sedan, and covered her with his body like a shield. "Down," he ordered, voice low and absolute. The explosion came like the sky cracking open. White light, heat, a punch of air that threw Cassidy off her feet. She hit something hard, but not the ground. Blackwood took the impact, sliding across the soaked pavement as debris rained down and the restaurant windows shattered behind them. Cassidy curled into herself, ears ringing, lungs burning with smoke, mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. The car didn't just burn. It vanished into twisted wreckage and flame. When the ringing faded enough for her to hear again, she felt the weight lift. Blackwood sat up and then stood, brushing ash from his shoulder as if he'd stumbled, not survived a blast at arm's length. His suit was torn, his back scorched, yet there was no blood. Before Cassidy could even breathe, the burned skin began to close, knitting itself together in seconds. His eyes caught the firelight and glowed faintly red, not like a trick, not like a reflection, like something alive behind them. He looked from the wreckage to Cassidy, and his calm voice landed like a verdict. "How did you know?" he asked. "That was hidden, even from me." The sirens arrived before Cassidy could find her voice, their blue and red lights slicing through the rain and smoke like blades. Police officers rushed forward, weapons drawn, shouting commands that blurred together in her ringing ears. She was still sitting on the wet pavement, staring at Adrian Blackwood, as if her mind refused to accept what her eyes had witnessed. His skin, she had seen it burn, blister, tear, and yet now it looked untouched, pale and flawless beneath the torn remains of his suit. He stood between her and the wreckage, posture calm, almost bored, as though surviving an explosion was an inconvenience rather than a miracle. "Step away from the girl," one officer barked, aiming his weapon squarely at him. Blackwood slowly raised his hands, the picture of cooperation, his expression shifting smoothly into polite concern. "Officers, thank God you're here," he said, voice measured and charming. "There's been a terrible accident." Cassidy wanted to speak, to tell them what she saw, but when Blackwood glanced back at her, the look in his eyes froze her vocal cords. "Do not say a word," he murmured quietly, a command that felt heavier than fear. She stayed silent as paramedics checked her, their questions echoing uselessly, while her gaze remained locked on the man who didn't bleed. 3 hours later, Cassidy sat in a cold interrogation room at the 18th District Station, still wearing her smoke-stained Waitress uniform. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making her headache worse. A detective entered, older, tired-looking, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He dropped a file on the table and introduced himself as Detective Silas Graves. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His questions were precise, surgical. Why did she scream before the explosion? How did she know? Who paid her? Cassidy insisted she didn't plant the bomb, that she only felt danger, but the more she spoke, the less believable she sounded even to herself. Graves leaned closer, lowering his voice. He told her the bomb was military grade, wired to the ignition, but remotely monitored. He told her Blackwood had enemies powerful enough to erase surveillance footage. Then he added the part that made her blood run cold. Paramedics had recorded Blackwood's vitals. Heart rate abnormally low, body temperature below human range. "People like him don't survive point-blank blasts," Graves said. "So what did you really see?" Cassidy looked down, remembering skin knitting itself back together, crimson eyes glowing through smoke. I don't know," she whispered, but even she didn't believe it anymore. The interrogation ended abruptly when the door burst open and a sharply dressed woman entered, radiating authority. She introduced herself as Isabel Vane, legal counsel for Blackwood Holdings, and within minutes produced official orders transferring Cassidy into Blackwood's private protective custody. Graves protested, but the paperwork carried signatures too powerful to challenge. As Cassidy was escorted through the station, officers parted like she was suddenly important or dangerous. Outside, rain still fell, though softer now, washing soot into the gutters. A massive black SUV waited in the loading dock, its windows tinted to complete darkness. Isabel opened the rear door and gestured for Cassidy to enter. She hesitated until a familiar voice spoke from inside. "Get in, Cassidy. The people who planted that bomb know you saved me. That makes you a liability and a target." She climbed in, heart pounding. Adrian Blackwood sat across from her, freshly dressed in a navy suit, untouched by the night's chaos. He held a glass of dark red liquid, swirling it casually. The interior smelled faintly metallic, like ozone after lightning. "Relax," he said when she recoiled from the drink. Wine, I have standards. The SUV began moving, city lights sliding past the tinted glass. Cassidy gripped her knees. Where are you taking me? She asked. Blackwood looked out the window before answering. Somewhere safe. You have questions. I have answers. He turned his gaze back to her, crimson flecks faintly visible in his eyes again. But first, he said quietly, you need to tell me what you are. Because you are not just a waitress. The SUV left the glow of downtown Chicago behind, gliding through rain-slick highways toward the silent, wooded outskirts where wealth hid itself behind gates and shadows. Cassidy sat rigid in the leather seat, hands clenched in her lap, replaying the explosion again and again, the fireball, the way Adrien Blackwood's body had shielded hers, the impossible healing. She kept stealing glances at him, wondering if he would suddenly vanish or change shape if she blinked too long. He looked composed, almost bored, gazing out the window like the night belonged to him. After nearly 40 minutes, the vehicle turned onto a private road lined with iron lanterns. Massive wrought iron gates, marked with a stylized crest, swung open automatically, revealing a sprawling Gothic estate that looked transplanted from another century. Blackwood Manor rose from the mist like a carved shadow towers, dark stone walls, and tall windows reflecting the moon like watchful eyes. Cassidy felt the hum again, louder than ever, vibrating through the air and into her bones as if the entire property pulsed with hidden power. Inside, the manor was vast and silent, marble floors echoing beneath her worn sneakers. Staff moved with eerie quiet efficiency, their expressions neutral, almost rehearsed. A stern older woman named Mrs. Gable greeted Blackwood without surprise, already aware of the bombing attempt. Cassidy was escorted to a lavish guest suite and given fresh clothes, the luxury so overwhelming it felt unreal against her waitress life. An hour later, after a hot shower finally washed away the smoke and fear, the door opened without a knock. Adrien entered, tie loosened, sleeves rolled slightly, carrying 2 crystal glasses and a decanter. The casualness made him more intimidating, not less. He poured bourbon and handed her a glass she didn't touch. You wanted answers, he said calmly. Cassidy swallowed hard and forced the question out. What are you? The air seemed to still around them. Adrien studied her face for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth she could survive. Then he spoke, voice smooth and unhurried. History has many names for my kind, but you would call me a vampire. The word landed heavier than the explosion. Cassidy's breath caught, memories rearranging themselves, his cold skin, the regeneration, the glowing eyes. He explained calmly, dismantling myths with clinical precision. Sunlight weakened, but did not destroy them. Religion did not repel them. They were predators, evolved and hidden among humanity for centuries. He told her he had been turned in London over 300 years ago, and now ruled the vampire clans across the Midwest. Cassidy pressed herself back against the bed, overwhelmed. And the bomb? She whispered. His expression darkened. A rival Victor Sterling. Young, ambitious, and reckless. He wants my throne. And the city. Adrien stepped closer, placing a hand beside her on the mattress, his presence cold yet magnetic. Which brings me back to you, he said softly. You sensed danger before I did. You smelled masked explosives. That is not human. He explained the truth she never imagined, that she was a watcher, a rare human capable of sensing supernatural energy and chemical anomalies tied to it. Her grandmother had been right. Her headaches were not illness, but instinct. Your kind once hunted mine, he said, studying her reaction. Cassidy trembled. Are you going to kill me? For the first time, Adrien's expression softened slightly, not warm, but thoughtful. He reached up, his cold fingers tilting her chin. "No," he said quietly. "You saved my life. That binds me to you by ancient law. As long as I live, you are under my protection." His thumb brushed her jaw in a gesture both possessive and restrained before he stepped back, control returning. "Sleep, Cassidy. Tomorrow we begin the difficult task of keeping you alive." He left her alone in the vast room, the hum of the manor vibrating through the walls. And as she lay awake, staring into darkness, one truth settled heavily in her chest. Her ordinary life had ended the moment she grabbed the sleeve of a vampire king. Cassidy barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fire swallowing the car, felt the force of the blast, and then the impossible image of Adrien Blackwood standing unburned in the smoke. Morning at Blackwood Manor did not feel like morning at all. The heavy tinted windows filtered sunlight into a permanent twilight, casting long gray shadows across the polished floors. She dressed in the clothes left for her soft cashmere, perfectly fitted jeans luxury that felt foreign on her skin. Hunger and confusion finally pushed her out of the guest suite and into the silent corridors. Portraits of stern, aristocratic figures lined the walls, all bearing a resemblance to Adrien's sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, ageless expressions. The hum followed her everywhere, vibrating faintly beneath the marble like hidden electricity. She eventually found the kitchen, a cavernous space of steel counters and quiet staff who moved with unnatural grace. Mrs. Gable informed her calmly that Mr. Blackwood was waiting in the solarium. The solarium was unlike anything Cassidy had ever seen, a massive glass structure filled with dark, exotic plants beneath heavily tinted panels that turned the daylight into muted dusk. Adrien sat at an iron table reading an actual newspaper, looking almost ordinary in a charcoal sweater. The illusion shattered the moment he glanced up, crimson flecks glinting faintly in his eyes. "Did you sleep well, little watcher?" he asked casually. Cassidy sat across from him, clutching her coffee. "I dreamed you ate me," she admitted. A ghost of amusement touched his lips, the first hint of humanity she'd seen. They spoke briefly about the attack, about his rival Victor Sterling, about the danger now surrounding her. Adrien downplayed her importance, claiming she was merely a witness, but his gaze suggested there was more he wasn't saying. Cassidy felt it too. Her instincts screamed that she had become part of something far larger than a bombing. The moment shattered without warning. Adrien went completely still, predator instincts surfacing in an instant. "Get down," he ordered quietly. Cassidy froze. He moved faster than thought, shoving her beneath the iron table just as the glass above them cracked violently. The sound of rifle fire echoed seconds later from the distant tree line. Bullets punched through the reinforced panels, sending shards raining down. Cassidy curled into herself, heart hammering, as Adrien stood fully upright instead of taking cover. His posture radiated cold fury, eyes glowing openly now. Another shot struck him square in the chest. Cassidy screamed, convinced he would fall, but he barely flinched. He looked down at the torn sweater, mildly annoyed. "Silver rounds," he muttered. How pedestrian. His skin was already trying to heal, though slower this time, the wound smoking faintly. Security stormed in, led by Elias, reporting breaches across the estate. The attackers weren't trying to kill Adrien. They were drawing forces out, targeting her. Adrien pulled Cassidy to her feet, grip firm but protective. "The manor is compromised," he said. "We leave now." Fear barely gave her time to breathe before she was rushed through hidden corridors into an underground garage. A matte black sports car waited sleek, predatory, like its owner. Adrien shoved her into the passenger seat and accelerated the moment the gates opened. Armed trucks smashed through the estate grounds to intercept them, gunmen firing as the car tore down the drive. Cassidy clutched the dashboard, eyes squeezed shut, feeling the violent precision of Adrian's driving as he rammed one vehicle aside and blasted through the front gates into the road beyond. As the manor disappeared behind them in smoke and chaos, Adrian reached over, his cold hand briefly steadying hers. "Welcome to day 2, Cassidy," he said, voice edged with adrenaline and something darker anticipation. "Try to keep up." The sports car tore through the industrial veins of Chicago, weaving between silent warehouses and rusted shipping containers as the adrenaline of escape slowly gave way to something colder. Cassidy could feel it before she saw it. Adrian was weakening. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until the leather creaked, and a thin sheen of cold sweat formed across his pale forehead. The bullet wound in his chest had not healed like the others. A dark stain spread across his shirt, and his breathing grew heavier, strained in a way that felt wrong for someone who had walked away from an explosion. "You're slowing down," Cassidy whispered, watching the speedometer dip. Adrian exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "I am aware." His voice had lost its velvet smoothness, replaced by a rough edge of pain. "Silver disrupts our regeneration. It poisons the tissue, slows cellular repair." He swerved suddenly into a narrow alley blocked by a rusted chain-link fence. Before Cassidy could question him, he pressed a hidden control on the dashboard. The fence rolled open mechanically, revealing a concealed elevator platform. The car descended underground into a concrete bunker lit by sterile white lights. The doors sealed above them with a heavy metallic thud. Adrian tried to step out but faltered, dropping to one knee beside the car. For the first time since she met him, he looked vulnerable, still powerful, but wounded in a way that felt real. Cassidy rushed to his side without thinking, fear overriding instinct. His skin felt like frozen marble, yet heat radiated from the wound in his chest. "There's a medical cabinet," he managed, pointing weakly across the bunker. "Bring the surgical kit, and I'll need your blood." Cassidy froze. "My blood?" He nodded once, teeth clenched. "Human blood accelerates healing. I don't have the strength to remove the silver myself." The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she didn't hesitate long. He had shielded her from fire. Now it was her turn. She retrieved the kit and knelt beside him, hands trembling as she cut through the ruined fabric of his shirt. The wound was worse than she expected, black veins spiderwebbed outward from the entry point, the silver slug glowing faintly beneath damaged flesh like a toxic ember. Cassidy focused, her watcher instinct sharpening her senses until the hum guided her hands. "This is going to hurt," she whispered. Adrian gave a faint, humorless smirk. "I've had worse." She cut carefully, and the moment the scalpel pierced his skin, Adrian roared a raw, animal sound that shook dust from the bunker ceiling. It wasn't human pain. It was predatory rage restrained by sheer will. Cassidy forced herself not to stop. With shaking forceps, she dug deeper until metal scraped. With a final pull, the flattened silver bullet clinked onto the concrete floor. "Now," Adrian rasped, fangs extending involuntarily. "Cassidy, please." The word please broke the last of her fear. She rolled up her sleeve and offered her wrist. Adrian didn't lunge. He took her arm slowly, reverently, as if asking permission without words. When he bit down, the sensation wasn't pain, but a rush of cold followed by light-headed warmth. She watched in awe as the black veins receded and the wound closed within seconds, flawless skin replacing torn flesh. He drank only briefly before pulling back, breathing steadier, strength flooding back into him. The energy in the room shifted instantly. He was no longer the wounded king, but the apex predator restored. He caught Cassidy as she swayed, pulling her gently against him to steady her. "You saved me again," he murmured, voice softer now. She rested weakly against his chest. "We're even," she whispered. Adrian's hand brushed her hair in a gesture unexpectedly tender. "No," he said quietly. "We are far beyond even. We are bonded now." Before she could process his words, an old rotary phone on the bunker wall rang sharply, cutting through the stillness. Adrien stiffened and answered. He listened in silence, his expression hardening with every second. When he hung up, his eyes burned with controlled fury. "Victor has escalated," he said. "He's taken hostages. Your co-workers from the Gilded Lily. He plans to execute one every hour until I hand you over." Cassidy's blood ran cold, fear twisting instantly into resolve. "Then we don't hide," she said, standing despite the dizziness. "We go get them." Adrien studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his ancient gaze. The underground bunker fell silent after Cassidy's words, but the weight of what she had just offered lingered heavily in the air. Adrien Blackwood studied her with an intensity that felt deeper than fear, as though he were measuring not her courage, but her worth. Outside, somewhere in the sleeping city, innocent people, her people, were being used as leverage in a supernatural war she never asked to join. "Victor wants you because you are valuable," Adrien said slowly. "Not just as bait, but as a weapon. A watcher bonded to the ruling king shifts the balance of power." Cassidy swallowed, but she didn't step back. "They're going to die because of me," she said. "So I'm going with you." For a long moment Adrien said nothing, then finally gave a small nod approval, not permission. "Then we go to war." Midnight painted the Chicago shipyards in steel shadows and sodium lights. Cargo cranes loomed like skeletons against the skyline, and the wind carried the scent of salt, oil, and danger. Adrien's car rolled to a stop at the edge of an abandoned loading dock. Armed figures moved in the distance, Victor Sterling's mercenaries, human and vampire alike. Cassidy's heart pounded, but the hum inside her had sharpened into clarity instead of fear. She could feel the supernatural energy around her, like heat signatures in the dark. Adrien stepped beside her, his presence cold but steady. "Stay behind me," he said, though he already knew she wouldn't. They walked forward together until Victor emerged from the shadows, young by vampire standards, but radiating ambition and cruelty. Behind him, bound and terrified, were the restaurant staff Henry, Toby, and others who had once barked orders at Cassidy, but now looked at her like hope itself. Victor smirked when he saw her. "The Watcher," he said. "I knew you were real." He demanded to trade her life for theirs. Cassidy looked at the captives, then at Adrien. The bond between them pulsed, silent but powerful. Without waiting for permission, she stepped forward. "Let them go," she said. Victor laughed until Adrien moved. No one saw the exact moment it happened. 1 second the king stood beside her. The next he was across the dock, faster than sight, tearing through mercenaries with controlled, lethal precision. Gunfire erupted, but Cassidy dropped low, her watcher senses guiding her movements before bullets struck. She grabbed a fallen weapon and fired at the chains binding the hostages, freeing them one by one. Fear had not vanished, but courage had grown louder than it thought. Victor tried to flee once his forces fell, but Cassidy sensed his movement before he vanished into shadow. "Behind you," she shouted. Adrien turned instantly, intercepting Victor mid-escape. The two vampires clashed in a blur of speed and fury, ancient power colliding with reckless ambition. In the end, experience defeated youth. Adrien disarmed him and forced him to his knees, not executing him, but stripping his authority, banishing him under clan law instead of starting a civil war. Mercy, not slaughter, ended the conflict. When silence finally returned to the docks, the hostages were safe, and the city lights reflected calmly on the water once more. Cassidy stood trembling, the weight of everything finally crashing down. Adrien approached her slowly, studying her not as a ruler studies a subject, but as a man seeing an equal. "You are brave tonight," he said, "not because you are powerful, but because you chose kindness over fear." Cassidy looked up at him, no longer shrinking beneath his gaze. She had entered his world as a frightened waitress. Now she stood as something more respected, protected, and bonded to a king. Adrien extended his hand, formal yet gentle. "You saved my life twice," he said, "and tonight you saved my city. Walk beside me, Cassidy, not as a servant, but as my chosen queen of the night." She hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his, warmth meeting cold, humanity meeting immortality. And as they walked toward the waiting horizon together, one truth echoed louder than any war kindness had turned fate itself.